Hello, this is Peter Falk, and you're listening to the Columbo Files on the Ludic Lounge, hosted by Antonicus, Maximus, and John Soares.
Hello, our good listeners, and welcome to another file management episode of the Columbo Files. I almost forgot there for a second what we were doing, but it came back to me. I am one of your co-hosts, John Soares, and with me, as always, is the ranking master himself, the man with the plan, and a gluteus, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV. Bid a good howdy doody to our listeners, Anthony.
Well, a good howdy doody to all the listeners, Anthony.
Well, golly.
Well, John, it looks like we're going to be ranking some files today, and our sub-file, as I like to call it, that you hate.
I know. I don't know why we're doing Don Knotts.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think it was from our last recorded where Don Knotts made an appearance.
Tony Curtis is better. Let's just be honest.
Way better. Way better.
I'm better than Don Knotts, Spartacus. Anyway, so, as I said, this is our special file management, our sub-file. This is us ranking the first season, as it is according to the box set, now that we are officially through the first 9 episodes of Columbo. Our ranking system is going to be a little bit different. If you are listeners of the podcast James Bonding, hosted by Matt Corley and Matt Myra, their ranking system is what we're going to be pulling from. So Anthony and I have ranked the episodes individually, and we will have a main list for the show as a whole. So how it's going to work is that if Anthony and I say Ransom for a Dead Man is dead last, and we both say that's number 9, we'll talk about why we ranked Ransom for a Dead Man as number 9. But if for spot 8, I say dead weight, and Anthony says short fuse, we will only talk about it when either Anthony or myself say whichever episode has now been said twice. So if Anthony says short fuse again, and I had said short fuse already, then we talk about short fuse, and it will go into the slot as number 8. I will be making sure that we manage that. It'll be a little bit tricky, but I think we'll manage.
Oh, I think it's going to be sloppy as hell, but I'm up for it.
That's why you're the gluteus. So, Anthony, I think it's time to get into the ranking. What do you have at number 9, Anthony?
Number 9.
Coming in at number 9, I'm Casey Kasem. I played Shaggy on Scooby-Doo.
Number 9, John, dead last is dead weight.
Hey, Anthony, guess what?
What, John?
Dead weight is my number 9, too. Let's talk about it.
Now, John, does this mean that we put it on the number 9 slot because we both agreed upon it?
Yes.
Excellent.
So, dead weight, Anthony, if I may go first as to why this episode is dead last. It's dead last for a number of reasons, in part due to the choppiness of that episode due to Peter Falk having issues with the studio and walking off set and not being able to film. The other part is the lack of chemistry he has with guest star of that week, Eddie Albert. And as talented as Suzanne Plachette is, the scenes that she has with Eddie Albert and that half-baked stalker romance that they did to kind of fill in time because Peter Falk wasn't there just doesn't really ring true for me. And it doesn't have any kind of standout moment in my head outside of, I think, probably like the one interaction we've talked about before. But Anthony, do you have anything to add?
I mean, not too much, because you had all those well off there, John. But in addition to everything you just mentioned, I mean, was our beginning of the conversation of Columbo kind of scraping that gray renegade cop role where they didn't need a warrant to search a boat, stuff like that, which I didn't appreciate. On top of that, not only was the relationship between Eddie Albert and Suzanne Plachette just didn't feel right, stalkerish. It was also the age gap between the two of them. It just didn't become believable for me. And not to mention Suzanne Plachette's mother, whose name is escaping me. I think it's Kate Reed in this episode. Mrs. Walters, I think it was the character name. Just her mean and cruel-spiritedness towards Suzanne Plachette in this episode just turned me off entirely. The score was not the best. It was fine. There was too much shoe polish, as we like to lovingly refer.
A lot of shoe leather, ladies and gentlemen.
So much shoe leather. And it's a reason, amongst all the reasons why this is dead last.
Moving on to number 8, Anthony. What do you have for number 8?
John, for number 8, I put Blueprint for Murder. And now, the reason I put it there...
Well, hold on.
Oh.
So, my number 8 is Blueprint for Murder. Or no, my number 8 is Short Fuse. So, we don't talk about anything yet until we say our number 7, because my number 7 is Blueprint for Murder. And now
my number 7 is... Short Fuse.
So now we can
just reverse those. Okay.
Yeah, we reversed it. So I will put Blueprint for Murder, since that was the first one said that came up twice.
Perfect.
And then Short Fuse will go in at number 7. So Anthony, let's talk about Blueprint for Murder.
Let's. Now, Blueprint for Murder, for those, it's one of the more recent episodes. I believe the series finale, if you will, of this season.
Yeah, it's the episode immediately preceding our retrospective on Peter Falk.
Yes. Now, there was a lot of great high points that we talked about in that episode, and I would refer you back to those notes, especially when it comes to Bo Williamson, played by Forrest Tucker, Goldie, my gosh, Janice Page, amazing job, amazingly done. But overall, the direction, but this was the only solo episode Peter Falk directed with the multiple scene shots, and just the way it was cut, I had to rank this as low as I did just because it was not as concise as I like my Columbo. It was not as character drawn. The villain, although while they had their high marks, that being Patrick O'Neill as Elliot Markham, just not an ideal villain to take even a top 5 spot for me, John.
Yeah, and we talked about it when we went over the episode properly, but I feel like Blueprint for Murder is definitely an episode that I think could have used another pass, at least in the script phase, and maybe in the casting phase, because I don't really like Patrick O'Neill. Is it Patrick O'Neill? The names blur together.
Yeah, Patrick O'Neill as Elliot Markham.
I don't, and I said it before, I still stand by my position that I think somebody like Leslie Nielsen probably would have been a better choice for Markham. And we talked about, creating an affair subplot that would have spiced up things a little bit. And,
100%.
But Janice Page, honestly, is the highlight of that episode for me. And whatever the hell Goldie's relationship with Columbo is, that was just utterly fascinating. And I know as frustrating as Peter Falk as frustrating a time as Peter Falk had as directing this episode, I wish he had done more. But I feel like he got sabotaged personally. I feel like that's what it is. It's, he had an opportunity to do something I think really interesting, and he just got flummoxed and thrown into some tricky stuff. He gets some good stuff. I think what he gets with himself and Janice Page is really strong. But the other thing I want to mention about this episode is that it's very heavy-handed in like exposition, where it's just more so than most Columbos. Most other Columbo episodes, they're a little bit more subtle with those aha gotcha moments. I feel like Blueprint for Murder just bashed you over the head with them.
Yeah, John, I agree with that. There were some high marks. Like I appreciate Columbo at the DMV line, even though it's not the DMV line, but essentially
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, essentially the governmental building where he gets the blueprints and all that. That was a fun scene. That was nice and well done. But overall, John, I had to rank it as low as I did just because, again, I needed more concise. I needed a stronger antagonist. And even the most gorgeous and best actor on this episode, being Janice Page, could not save this blueprint for a dud of an episode.
Now, let's talk about Short Fuse. I think this has a strong ending, and
Yes.
but I mean, for me, I ranked it as low as I did because not even the ending could save the majority of that episode. It's like it's
Agreed.
2/3 of shoe leather and Roddy McDowell in way too tight pants, walking around a chemical plant, being a little weirdo.
Yeah, and John, the only reason why I personally marked this one higher than I did for Blueprint for Murder is just for the ending alone. Like that ending with a nice noir soundtrack played by Gil Malel there at the end. That's that last third, if you could even call it a third, that's what made me rank this one slightly higher than Blueprint.
I mean, it's such a left turn from where the majority of that episode is, to be, in my opinion, and it's such good tension throughout the whole scene. And you're right, and I think in part it's the music and Roddy McDowell's increasing manicness in that whole scene that really bring it home.
Yeah, absolutely, wholeheartedly. But overall, John, even that ending just made this episode, even though it was titled Short Fuse, I wanted an even shorter fuse
Very
to get
much
past
so.
this episode.
You needed to be 44 minutes.
Yes, 100%.
All right,
100%.
Anthony, what is your number 6?
My number 6, John, is Death Lends a Hand.
My number 6 is Suitable for Framing.
Interesting.
And my number 5 is Prescription Murder. Anthony, what is your number 5?
My number 5, John, is Suitable for Framing.
Let's talk about Suitable for Framing.
Excellent. So, John, Suitable for Framing, and for those of you who don't remember this one, this was this Ross Martin as Dale Kingston one, where he is the art professor, the art extravagant, with the very loud tuxedos, the very awful jokes at a party he's given to stroke his own ego.
All I remember is when you take the W off Wart, you get art.
That's probably the best line of this entire episode. Now, again, but John, we also have to mention Don Amici,
folks. Don Amici.
Even though we had Mr. Amici on the Amici for this episode, it was fine. I liked Ross Martin. I feel Ross Martin had a lot better chemistry with Peter Falk than some of our previous antagonists that we mentioned. However, just with the missing elements of the subplot of, hey, my lover who I just cast aside, that we're not going to solve her murder. We're just going to worry about the first overall murder. That just didn't sit right with me, which is why it's on my lower aspect.
And yeah, I can't even. I'm surprised at myself for not remembering that was the case. That they completely drop her story. It's just something along the way to get Dale Kingston into jail. But you're right about Ross Martin and Falk. There is a better relationship between the actors and the characters there. I think it's one of the first examples of a suspect being very antagonistic towards the lieutenant. I mean, we have a couple later on. I think the best example is probably going to be Murder by the Book, where, at first, there is a politeness towards Columbo, and then it turns into animosity. But I think this is one of the first instances where it is straight up animosity from almost jump.
Right.
And that is something that comes back up throughout the show and in different characters. So to see the OG one of that instance is always, worth noting. But you're right about them dropping off the murder of Tracy O'Connor, Rosanna Huffman's character. It's just it's wrong, but we can't forget the ending of this one, because this one is one of the all-timers.
Yes, which is why the ending, not only the chemistry between Falk and Ross Martin, but the ending is why it made my personal top 5, as opposed to, leaving out Death Lends a Hand. That's why I made my top 5 entirely, John. But that ending was spectacular, with Columbo and the gloves on, Ross Martin getting extremely manic and frantic about, oh, you framed me. And nah, sucker, I had these gloves on the entire time since I've been here. Excellent ending. That's why it made my top 5 over Death Lends a Hand, but overall still on the bottom tier as far as it goes for me, Joe.
Agreed. So we were at number 5. I was at Prescription Murder. You were Suitable for Framing. So my number 4th pick, Anthony, is Death Lends a Hand. That puts the master ranking of Death Lends a Hand at number 5.
All right, then. Let's jump into it, John.
Yes, please. By all means, take it away.
So, John, and for those of our lower listeners listening at home, this was the one where we had Robert Culp as the detective with his ginormous detective agency that essentially was almost like the FBI now that I think about it. Robert Culp is a Columbo fan favorite. He's a favorite of mine as well. He did an excellent job as the murderous boss of this agency. For me personally, I also liked Arthur Kennicott, played by Ray Milland. I think he did an excellent job as a foil to Columbo throughout this episode. I did enjoy the plot. I enjoyed where it led. I enjoyed the conversation that they had towards the end where they catch Robert Culp in it. Now, John, the reason I put it, though, at number 6 for me is, for me, the antagonist of Ross Martin in Suitable for Framing, the chemistry and the sparks that they had between Peter Falk and Ross Martin, I feel did more justice than Robert Culp and Peter Falk in this particular episode.
Okay. I think part of me ranked Death Lends a Hand as high as it does because it is the first instance of Robert Culp. And Robert Culp is somebody that shows up multiple times. So I think the legacy of his tenure in this show might have overshadowed the more critical part of it, I guess, for me. But, for me, I appreciated Robert Culp a little bit more because he felt like almost a mirror image of Columbo, like what happens if Columbo went down a different path, but didn't really keep himself sharp. He got comfortable and didn't really feel like he needed to keep himself on the ball, and that's why he made such a monumental screw up.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he even offers Columbo that spot in the detective agency. It's just like, I see a little bit of me and you. I think that's something that's unspoken, but it's definitely something that comes to me now, at least. I think Milland, we talked about it in the episode. Milland is very notable in this episode because he does such strong work, but very quietly.
Yes.
And that's something that honestly I remember more so in this rewatch of the episode than before, because it's just he felt like it was just an old man who lost his trophy wife, but then you dig into the nuances that Milland is bringing, you see how much more broken he really is, and then you compare that to the sheer remorselessness of Culp's character and how he treats himself and everybody in his company.
And one final note, John, and why I'm okay with this being in the Ludic Lounge's top 5 is because this was also the first instance where we learned that Columbo doesn't carry a gun. He doesn't carry a weapon, and that he does not need a pistol or an assault rifle, whatever have you, to get the bad guy. He uses his mind, he uses his charisma, he uses his personal brand of detective work to catch the bad guy. So that's why I am ultimately okay with it being in the top 5 overall.
All right, Anthony, I said my number 4 of Death Lends a Hand. What is your number 4? Or it might be a little bit before we talk about it.
So my number 4, John, was Ransom for a Dead Man.
Okay. We're going to have to move on to our next one because I haven't said it yet. My number 3, Anthony, is Lady in Waiting. What is your number 3?
Hey, John, my number 3 is Prescription Murder.
Hey, we both said it. Let's talk about it.
Excellent. John, I really, really very much enjoyed Prescription Murder. It was the first pilot, so it wasn't nearly as polished as it could have been. Mm-hmm. Like, as we know, Columbo, as Peter Falk portrays him in everyone's mind when they think of this show. But just the cast of characters of, Gene Barry as Ray Fleming, as, Catherine Justice as Joan Hudson. Those two alone really made this episode. And again, for even the negative side of Columbo, where he's screaming and yelling at Joan, trying to get her to confess, while that is a negative, still just that trio of characters alone carried this first pilot to extreme heights. And let's not forget, John, the grooviness of the intro music of the Rorschach test.
That I still don't comprehend how that was, a good idea, but it was the late 60s. I understand it, though I don't have to like it. I agree with a lot of what you said, Anthony. I think that seeing as how this is that first TV broadcast version with Falk, we had talked about it a little bit in our discussion that, there was a couple soft tries, on stage and in TV with this story long before Peter Falk came along. But, this is the first instance of us seeing Falk get his teeth into this. It's a very different Columbo, which it's nice to get that kind of from the onset and just get it out of the way and get the aggressiveness out of the way. But it's so interesting to watch Falk do that because he takes Columbo in such the opposite direction of that. And to put it up against the female lead there, who's what was it, Catherine Justice?
Yes.
Yes. That scene between Falk and Justice, that interrogation, I think, as uncomfortable as it is by modern standards, I think that it's such a brilliant instance of acting between the two of them that it elevates the episode. And this is already an episode that was elevated by the great stuff that Gene Barry was doing as our villain.
Absolutely. And John, to rewind this particular talk down, I'm going to give a quote from the ColumboFile.com, our good friends over there, and all the great work they do. And while he's a riveting presence who earns our respect, speaking of Columbo in this episode, could we have loved the Columbo that we meet in Prescription Murder to last essentially throughout the entirety of Columbo? I think not, is how they finish it off.
Yeah, no, I am inclined to agree. It is too much, way too much to deal with that much angry Columbo.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, so your number 3 was Prescription Murder, and we talked about Prescription Murder. My number 3, I already said my number 3, right?
Yes, but we skipped over Ransom for a Dead Man, so I think that would be, according to the rules, our number 3.
Talk about Murder by the Book, Anthony.
All right, John. So Murder by the Book was our second pilot of Columbo, the first pilot which we see Columbo in his present form, which we know and love about him. And John, this was also the Steven Spielberg directed pilot, which is one of the high points, which is why I personally put it as high as I did on number 2 on my personal list.
And this is another one like the Robert Culp episode, Death Lends a Hand, where we get recurring guest star Jack Cassidy and all his Jack Cassidy-ness. Which is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. Jack Cassidy is a legend in the business for a reason. And he brings such, delightful menace and nuance to his performances. And I think here it's like you buy into the relationship between Jack Cassidy and Martin Milner of Route 66 fame, which we have learned comes up a lot in this show.
Yes, wholeheartedly, John. And for me personally, again, we got, with the pilot, the way it was shot by Spielberg, it made me yearn for just how much I wished a lot more of these directions would take, with the beautiful panning shots, with the up-close shots that we saw where the camera is slightly elevated or not elevated, the opposite of elevated, where the character is elevated because the camera is so below. And again, that just spoke to a lot of Jack Cassidy's strengths, because he is definitely a character actor. He definitely emotes quite well on screen, and the way Spielberg directed him and the way he shot him really allowed him to chew the scenery with his physical emotions to emote what he was feeling in these particular moments.
And Spielberg's presence brings something that I feel kind of gets lost as we go on. It's unfair to put all of that on top of the subsequent directors, because Spielberg's Spielberg. I mean, let's just, there's no way around that. Certain people are just born with that amount of grit and talent, and Spielberg is probably one of them. He has his own faults, but that's besides the point. He there's a certain kind of quality and exactness that he brings, and that was appreciated by Levinson and Link. That was appreciated by Falk, and it's like you're watching the birth of a legend through the work through working with other legends. It's something to behold. And I think, this is also, to talk about performances as well, Anthony, I won't step on top of Jack Cassidy because I think he did that so well, but I think this is the first real strong instance of Columbo fully formed. I think when we talk about him in Prescription Murder and Ransom for a Dead Man, it is still very much Peter Falk trying to figure out what Columbo is going to be. And I think he has it mostly figured out by the time you get to Ransom for a Dead Man. But here is the Columbo that's going to carry out through every season of this show between NBC and ABC. It's the character that he puts himself into the most. And I don't think it's accidental that it's Spielberg here because of that, because I think, Spielberg has a knack for getting work that is good character stuff. And
Right.
what Falk is able to evolve Columbo into is, in my head, good character stuff.
And again, John, just one more thing before we move on to it.
Just one more thing. Anthony, take it away.
I just want to talk about how we already mentioned Jack Cassidy. We remembered how great he was in this episode. We talked about Peter Falk and how excellent he was, and how this is the episode where we go to grow and learn with Columbo and love him so. But let's not also forget Barbara Colby as Lily Lysanka, and that just scene that chills me to the bone of that silent scream, that POV shot of that silent scream where she's getting murdered as Jack Cassidy's second murder in this episode. Holy moly, it's unforgettable. It gives me chills just thinking about it, and which is why it's definitely a top 3 overall for us here at the Ludic Lounge.
Agreed. Now, Anthony, I think, based off of what we have left, I was able to determine what comes next. My number 1 is Ransom for a Dead Man, and that's going to be our second on a list. And our number 1, Anthony, seeing as how I already said it, but it is your number 1, Lady in Waiting. So let's talk about Ransom for a Dead Man, Anthony.
So Ransom for a Dead Man, for those listening at home, as well as John and I here, that is the one where we are graced by Lee Grant as Leslie Williams, as well as Patricia Matlick as Margaret Williams, her stepdaughter. And this is the whole episode where I believe that it really was the first instance of a great particular back and forth, because this was early on in our season. But between Leslie Williams, played by Lee Grant, and Columbo, played, of course, by Peter Falk, and the great animosity between those two of those characters really elevated this particular episode, which is why we have it as high as we did. While some of the side characters were kind of just messy, I'm talking about Agent Coulson as Harold Gould as Agent Carlson, and all that fun stuff there. Lee Grant's performance, and the scene that comes to mind is when they're in her personal aircraft in the sky, and Columbo is just freaking out, looking green to the gills. Just that scene alone, the tit for tat that Columbo had with Leslie Williams, really elevated this to a higher standard for me, John.
I agree, and I think that this episode is important because it's also an episode which the format is copied by a later episode where the suspect will take Columbo out in some vehicle to unnerve him. We see that in Dead Weight. So this is like one of that early examples of the villain trying to just throw Columbo off just a smidge because through some means or something.
But this was done well.
Yes. Yeah, this is the good version of that. Dead Weight is the bad version of that. I am a little bit hit and miss on Patricia Matlick as Margaret Williams. I think she verges on crazy shrill a little too much, but I think it's not too bad. The real star here is how Falk and Lee Grant play off each other. It is a tremendous example of a woman holding her own under fire, which is something that we'll see very similar characters to Leslie Williams later on, but you don't get there without Lee Grant. And she is astounding. She has such presence and is able to just move her stance on a dime. I'm thinking about that initial scene with the FBI, where she verges from being the worried housewife to the flirtatious, educated woman to the concerned wife back, all within an instant. I'm also still proud of the fact that I am assuming a fair subplot in this episode between Lee Grant's character and Harlan Ward's character, the FBI agent.
I didn't mind that being so subtle, as opposed to our other episode we talked about earlier, where we wish we would have had that. I didn't mind the subtlety of the affair there. I found it to be more intriguing. And John, let's not forget that listener Mike C., which we're going to shout out as well here, sent us an email regarding Ransom for a Dead Man, which is how I want to finish off talking about the episode that she was watching on TV, her being Margaret Williams, that black and white little doodad there. It was a TV movie known as Double Indemnity, which essentially had close to the same plot as what happened in the Columbo episode. So thank you, Mike C., for reaching out. Thank you all for this season who have reached out to us at our email that Peter Falk just so happily lovingly gives you after every episode. We appreciate it. We love you for it, and we appreciate everything that you do for us. And thanks for lounging with us.
Indeed. I couldn't have said it better myself. Now, Anthony, I think it is time to get to the official #1 episode, at least for you personally and for the Ludic Lounge as a whole, Lady in Waiting.
Oh, what a great episode, John.
Agreed. Would you agree with me in saying that the quality of this one snuck up on us?
Yeah. Upon watching this a second time, because I've only seen it one other time, upon watching it and actually critiquing it and having to take the time to make notes and edits, not just allowing myself to just, watch it aimlessly or being distracted while watching this, it snuck up on me as far as Beth Chadwick's performance, played by Susan Clark. Leslie Nielsen, I remember, as being solid, so that didn't shock me. But again, just the little nuances as far as like Mrs. Chadwick's performance, Bryce Chadwick, the murder victim, played by Richard Anderson. Just those little nuances really raised the stakes for me and really made me rethink watching Columbo, if that makes sense. Made me rethink how I view these episodes, not just little fun doodads, but also how deep that these episodes could be.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to elaborate on that, but you did that so well. I don't feel like I have to. I agree wholeheartedly. I think that there are a lot of pretty great nuances to these characters that, as you start, digesting what each person is trying to get at through the other and their actions towards each other. Susan Clark is a dynamo here, going back from, essentially a hostage daughter who cannot do anything she would want to life to this hedonistic wild child, and Leslie Nielsen doing, what he was known for the longest time before he fell into comedy, being the straight man. He is the straight man to her wildness. And seeing how he brought his own nuances, I always think back to that scene of him running at the beginning of the episode, right when Beth murders her brother, and the sheer look of panic and fear in his face as he's just charging through the yard. I think other actors would have just tried to play it as the stoic manly man type. And I think Leslie Nielsen is able to still play that, macho man type lawyer character in his character here. But also, is willing to embrace his emotional side and say, there is more value to this character if I imbue him with a sense of fear of loss and unsurety, because I think that's something I picked up as well watching this time around. It's like, I'm not 100% sure if he really believes her, but he wants to believe her, and that's enough for him, at least in the onset of that episode.
And John, we haven't even talked about two of the major points to make this the number one episode for us. We talked about Leslie Nielsen, but we didn't talk about the scene in the cute little drive-in between Peter Falk and him, where I feel like if there was any other actor besides Leslie Nielsen that scene, it would come off as him being arrogant, but because it was Leslie Nielsen and the care he puts into his work, it came out as affable. He appreciated Columbo, being this affable oaf, and he worked with Columbo so well, worked with Peter Falk so well. And again, you put any other actor, even the ones we were just talking about, Jack Cassidy, for example, even if you throw Jack Cassidy in that, I don't feel like he would have perfected that particular character, which would have elevated this episode. Yeah. And then, John, please give me your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, and also let's look at other Columbo player Robert Culp. I think Robert Culp would have played this very much the physical presence. It is, he is going to be the intimidator to Columbo, and saying, I believe Beth, you're not going to get in the way of this because I believe her. You're wrong. There's nothing to support your theory. And I think that with Nielsen, he plays it as somebody who is entertained by Columbo and is willing to play the logic game.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe if that was presented to Robert Culp, I think he would play it the same way. But, I mean, based off of what they typically gave Robert Culp and Columbo, it was always very kind of imposing men, and I think Leslie Nielsen is able to do that, but also really talk about, what he's thinking and what he's feeling in the moment. And that's not something I think regular Columbo players like Cassidy or Culp would feel 100% comfortable doing.
Yeah. And John, to wrap up not only this episode, but to wrap up this ranking and this episode we're talking about, I have just one more thing.
All right, please do. Just one more thing.
And just one more thing.
John, I want to talk about how this episode ends. And I want to mention it for multiple reasons, because this was where we got a taste for it, like we mentioned in the previous episode with Robert Culp about Columbo never carrying a gun. But we really got it here where at the end of this episode, Beth Chadwick pulls a gun on him, ready to shoot him dead.
Yeah.
But Columbo doesn't have a gun. He de-escalates the situation so as only he could, as eloquently as he could, by essentially saying, you're too classy of a lady to do something like that. And then she gives him the gun, and he goes out for a victory cigar, just as in my viewpoint, contemplating his life at that point, because he literally had a near-death experience. And yet he found a way, with no weapon, without putting a bullet in her, he found a way to de-escalate the situation to the point where he took her peacefully. And that's a beautiful thing within itself. And I really, folks, if for some reason you happened on this particular episode before you listened to Lady in Waiting episode, please go back to that. Even if it's just the last 15 minutes or so, John gave a very beautiful monologue regarding this and touched me, and it touched him as well. And hopefully it touched you all, which is why you're listening to our series wrap-up for season 1.
Yeah, and I, like, in our Falk episode, I made an addendum to that, and that, that's a little bit more real world. But I agree, Anthony. I think that the finale of Lady in Waiting is everything I think that appeals to people about Columbo, is that he is able to communicate and that he is able to get to the heart of people and whatever their issue is. And I think it's something that, it's just valuing intelligence. And I think that, there might be a couple of exceptions as we go down the line. There's one example that I know of, I think in the second season, where Columbo is very actively personally against the suspect, but I think in some way he respects the people that he's coming across. They are intelligent people, and he's not going to belittle them in that way. And I think that's just how you should treat everybody, in general. It's just like give them a modicum of respect, just just for the fact that they're here, and don't make an assumption otherwise until they give you a reason to. And, to see Columbo reminder, hey, you're better than falling into violence is admirable.
Absolutely, John. As you eloquently put, yet again, I have nothing to add to that. But my last and final thoughts before we say goodbye, John, as only you can, is again, I want to give a shout out to Michael C., who was the first one to reach out to us. I want to give another shout out to Miss Jackie, who reached out to us. And again, Mike C., who I previously mentioned. Thank you three personally for emailing us, letting us know how much you enjoy this. John, and for everyone listening at home, this isn't to brag. This is more of just, I had no idea we could get to this point. We have over 1,000 personal downloads of our Columbo episodes, lifetime downloads, if you will. Over that now, but just I never thought we would get 2 downloads, let alone to how far as we have. And it really genuinely chokes me up when I think about this, because this became just a passion project between John and I, wanting to share with the world how much we love our coat trench-wielding detective. So from the bottom of my heart, personally, I want to say thank you. And please keep listening, because we're going to keep doing them. Now, John, send us off as only you know how with your final thoughts and your personal goodbye.
Well, I mean, crap. I don't know if I could top anything you said, Anthony. I just want, like Anthony, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's, we've only had so many people write in, but, we know people are listening. We appreciate you guys. Please feel free to, just reach out to us on social media, via email. We're happy to hear from you, and we're going to keep going as long as we can manage this. We're aiming for all 69, and then who knows what comes after that. If we turn into a Peter Falk retrospective, I'm okay with that. If we turn into something else, I'm okay with that too. But, this has been, as we close out the first season and jump into the subsequent seasons, it's a thrill to be able to talk about this show as in depth as we are. It's a thrill to be able to talk to people who are just as passionate about it and find as much weight in it as we do. And we just can't wait to give you guys more. So on behalf of my co-host, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV, my podcast brother, who I would not be able to do any of this without, mostly because he's the smart guy who does all the computer stuff. And I'm just the pretty face and the pretty voice. You have been listening to another file management in the Columbo Files. I have been your co-host, John Soares, and I would just like to say thank you all. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Peter Falk, and you've been listening to an episode of the Columbo Files, hosted by the Ludic Lounge. And just one more thing. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Ludic Lounge, Anthony at RojoLoco44, and John at just_John_0891. Or feel free to email us at theludiclounge@gmail.com.